Okay, thank you for being here. We're going to the Holy Land, okay? My name is Rick Steves, and for 30 years I've been teaching people how to travel in Europe. And the Holy Land is not Europe. The Holy Land is easy accessible from Europe, and the Holy Land is a place that any of us can go to, I think, be steep on the learning curve and enjoy some great culture, some great people, and at the same time sort through a very complicated issue. So thank you for joining us today. And it's just, for me as a travel writer, so exciting to be able to go to a place where I'm steep on the learning curve and where I feel like I'm just really getting out of my comfort zone. I went to the Holy Land this last April to scout, intending to go back this October with our TV crew to make a public television special on the Holy Land. And we did exactly that. And I've got some slides to share with you that just try to sort through the context. Now, whenever you're talking about a troubled part of the world, a lot of people already have their side. They know, they've got an agenda, they know who's right, they know who's wrong. You know, they're partisan about it. And for me, there's a lot of people in the middle that just are caring people that want to understand it. They're good people. They want to get a context. They want to get an empathy for people on both sides of the struggle. And that's my goal. I've been to a lot of troubled places over the years, and this is one of the most complicated. And when you talk about the Holy Land, just saying certain words gets you in trouble with certain people. Okay, so I want to say right off the bat, I'm not an expert on this. I'm a travel writer, I'm a tour guide specializing in Europe, but all of us are involved in the Holy Land because the United States is a big player in the Holy Land, and it's our responsibility, if we are caring citizens, I believe, to take an initiative and sort it out. And what was impressive to me is how little I knew about Palestine. I've been to the Holy Land several times over the last decades, but I really didn't understand what the issue was. And I thought, I really should be paying attention. So any of us can do that, and that's what I want to share today. I want to sort of give a context first before I get into the itinerary. The Holy Land, I call it the Holy Land because it's the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And it's Holy Land because God decided to put 3 different religions' important place on the same spot. Okay, and I don't know why he did that, but you've got Muslims, Christians, and Jews on this same piece of real estate, all right? Now, the Holy Land has had many names over history. Basically, you've got the Sea of Galilee below sea level, the Jordan River connecting it to the Dead Sea, which is way below sea level, and then you've got all sorts of very important places in here. Now, look at the scale, 50 miles. So it's about 50 miles at its widest and 100 miles tall, and it's laced by beautiful freeways. You can get around fast. You can get around fast. Now, we're going to go through the history of it all and everything, but the point is, Israel is this color area, and what is called Palestine is both the West Bank and Gaza. Now, I'm not going to talk about Gaza today. That's run by Hamas, and it's not welcome for tourists, and Hamas is more extreme than the Palestinian Authority that's running West Bank. I'm going to be talking about West Bank, but I'll be referring to the word Palestine, okay? Now, the challenge when we go to the Holy Land is to really empathize with all the different players. And the challenge for people living there, I believe, is to get over the past and understand the present and carve out a peaceful, sustainable future. That's a tough bill, but that's got to be the challenge. I'll tell you right now, I am not anti-anybody, and I could say I'm pro-Israel in the sense that I think the best thing for Israel is to find a way for Palestine to have security and dignity. That, to me, is pragmatic. And when you go to Israel, you gain an empathy for Israel, and if you don't cross the wall into Palestine, you get one narrative. I wanted to get both narratives. That was my goal, without choosing sides, and to try to sort through it. So I had great guides on both sides. One of these guys is Jewish, and one of them's Palestinian. One of them's Muslim. Actually, no, one of them's Christian. But I won't even tell you who's who, okay? Because they're all cousins. They got the same Abraham for their, patriarch. And but we get different narratives. And what was striking to me is my friends over there are forbidden to go across the wall to talk to the other people. And that was the striking thing, is they're smart people, they're tour guides, and I know more about the place 10 miles away than they do because I'm from outside and I can go back and forth. One thing you gain when you travel any place is this feeling that people are precious. Children, you just gotta love children. You look at these kids, who knows if they're Jews or Muslims, they deserve a good future, right? And when you travel around the Holy Land, it is so poignant and complicated, and these kids are born into a lot of baggage. And I'm in Palestine, and these kids have their plastic guns, and they're shooting imaginary Jews. And it's terrible. And it makes me sad. And then I go into a Jewish settlement, and kids the same age have their little plastic guns, and they're shooting Palestinian terrorists. And I think that's terrible. And then I think, what am I judging? When I was a little kid, I had a plastic gun my parents gave me, and I was a cowboy. I was shooting Indians. What little American kid didn't play cowboy and he's killing Indians? Those are just the indigenous people that really didn't belong there because that's our land, right? So it occurred to me, children grow up fantasizing about killing the enemies of their parents. And we're not different. We're not different. It's a beautiful thing about traveling to get out and explore that. So these kids could be killing Jews, and this little kid in his fantasy could be killing Muslim terrorists. And as adults, we need to get together and talk about this. I just think it's important. A lot of Israelis said the Muslims are raising their kids to hate Jewish people. And I talked to Palestinians about it, and they said, we feel like we're occupied, and our challenge is to raise our kids so they don't hate Jewish people, because they're living in this situation that's so difficult for them. So it's a very complicated and fascinating thing to check out. And as travelers, we have this royal opportunity to go there and talk to people. I'm talking to an Orthodox Jew, learning that perspective. I'm talking to a Muslim imam, learning that perspective. And it is such a rich experience, and what you come away with is a respect for the nobility of these people, a respect for how they love their land, and a respect for how deep their heritage is. The passions there would blow you away. You might think, why don't you guys just move to Florida, There's a passion for the land there. It's where they belong. It's who they are. It's a beautiful thing when you travel there. And let me give you just a real quick, sketchy history. This is, it's such a complicated thing, but some little handles on the historical context are important. First of all, it goes back, way back, 2,000 years before Christ, before there was even color photographs, okay? Just black and white. And to Abraham. Now, I don't know why Abraham's such a big deal, but he is the linchpin here, and he had two sons. He had sons by two women, and one was Ishmael, and from that came the Arab people. And then Isaac was another son from another woman, and from that came the Israelis, all right? Now, way back then, right off the bat, basically, I believe Israelis or Israelites were Jewish in their religion. But remember, the Muslims didn't come along until 600s, the 7th century with Muhammad. So for 2,500 years, Arabs didn't have the Muslim religion that we attribute to them. Now we know about the 1st century, Jesus comes along, and now there's Christians in the Holy Land. And you'll see a lot of Christians and a lot of Christian heritage in the Holy Land. In 70 AD, the Judea, which was a Roman colony, the Jews there rebelled against the Roman Empire, King Herod, and you can't do that and get away with it. And the Romans slammed them down, and they destroyed the temple of the Jewish people, and that was the year 70 AD, a terrible year for the Jewish people because that began the diaspora, when the Jews spread all over the world away from their homeland, not to come back until the 20th century. Now, in the 19th century, in the 1800s in Europe, there was a guy named Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl established this notion of Zionism. Zionism is when you can think of all the Jewish people scattered over the face of this planet, the sense that they have a homeland and it's in Israel where they belong to be their historic homeland, and it was a spirit, a patriotism for having a Jewish homeland. I think it's a beautiful thing, Zionism. Some people color it in a negative terms. If I say Zionism, I'm not thinking negative. I'm thinking that's people who are Jewish who believe they should live in their historic homeland. That's Herzl. You'll see him all over Israel because he was the father of that notion. Now, there was a trickle of Jews back to the Holy Land before Nazism, but with Hitler and the Holocaust, you've got the murder of 6 million Jews, and of course, the whole world is interested in finding some kind of justice or some kind of future or some kind of hope for Jewish civilization, and the United Nations helps establish the modern state of Israel in 1947. What's very poignant to me is settlers, Zionists, founders of modern Israel coming back from concentration camps, still wearing their concentration camp shirts and founding this country. Can you imagine the spirit of that in 1948? And it is just, you get caught up in it when you're there. That's a beautiful thing. At the same time, after World War I, there's lots of refugee problems. Masses of people. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of people being shoved everywhere. It's horrific all over Europe and North Africa and the Middle East. When Israel was founded, there were a lot of Jews that were shoved out of Arab lands and ended up in Israel, and they were refugees. And when Israel was founded, 700,000 Palestinians who lived in what would be Israel were made refugees and sent east, all right? There was a slogan that was popular when Israel was founded. Let's see. A land without a people for a people without a land. Now, that implies there was nobody there. That region was sparsely populated. You know, there's about 1 million people there, and today there's 12 million people there, but it was certainly not a land without a people for a people without a land. There was a people without a land who I believe deserved a land, but it wasn't quite as easy as a piece of vacant real estate. And there's the crux of the issue right there that we have to be mindful of, and we'll talk about that as we go along. So Israel was founded in 1948, and it was an interesting first couple of decades as an independent nation, and it was tough because they were surrounded by aggressive Arab neighbors, and there was not good relations between them. The problem for Israel was the Arab neighbors had the high ground all around Israel, and that's nerve-wracking. It's really nerve-wracking, and there's propaganda from both sides that was ugly. But Israeli kids grew up being told, the Arabs want to push you into the sea, and you'll be, breakfast for the fish, that kind of thing, because there would be angry propaganda coming over the border from Arab states. And there was angry propaganda going the other way. But this is a very difficult situation. Israel decided this is untenable. Israel had to strike, and in 1967 they had the Six-Day War, and it's just 6 days. And in 6 days, Israel's land quadrupled. And to this day, Israel holds the high ground everywhere. And I believe Israel has a passion for having the high ground because they don't want to not have the high ground. It's not that they want to have the high ground for the sake of the high ground. It's just they don't want anybody else to have the high ground and have to live under it, and understandably so, okay? That was the Six-Day War in 1967. Now, after this, you've got a situation where Israel has won, and the Palestinian cause is, I think, pushed down, and there is disgruntlement and guerrilla warfare and terrorism and suicide bombers or freedom fighters or martyrs, whatever you call them. It's very important for us to remember that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. It's tough in the United States because we are redcoats now. We used to be shooting in from the bushes, celebrating guerrilla warfare and terrorism. But now that we're on top, we believe everybody should march in formation, and whoever got more guns gets to win, okay? So this is an awkward thing, but it's important if we want to give this whole complex issue a fair shake is to remember, if you live in a country with no tanks and no airplanes, you fight without uniforms. And if you live in a country with all the weaponry that you need, you have uniforms, and then you'd get to call yourself soldiers instead of terrorists, okay? I don't want to apologize for any kind of terrorism or violence, but there is a different perspective on things, and it's clear there are freedom fighters. There were Israeli terrorists, going for a good Jewish cause, and there are Palestinian terrorists going for a good Muslim cause. And this is a complicated issue that we need to grapple with. Of course, America owns this problem. We're putting a lot of money into there. We have a lot of interest in the strategic value of that area. We like the oil in the Middle East, and it's a big headache for us. And it's a responsibility for us to be involved and try to find something going on. Clinton, I think, worked heroically on that with the Oslo Peace Accords in 1993. And this is an iconic photograph in the Middle East for the Middle East struggle. You got Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat in Washington, D.C., shaking hands, hoping to have some kind of a peace. It's quite promising at that time. Everybody in Israel and Palestine, not everybody, but predominantly when I was talking to people, that was a very, very hopeful, promising time. It was after the first Intifada. Now we got common sense sort of possibility, and before the second Intifada, all right? Sadly, if you're interested in movements for peace, when you've got all sorts of complicated and difficult baggage and violence and bloodshed and sectarianism, all that kind of stuff, when reasonable people, even if they weren't reasonable at one time, when they want to get reasonable, if only for pragmatic, peaceful terms, and they do something courageous like happened right here, the people to their extremes get mad and undercut them. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, not by a Palestinian, but by a Jew, a radical Jew that was angry for him for being a force for peace with Palestine. And Arafat was undercut by people on his extreme side that thought he was too moderate, all right? So to me, it's a heartbreak when you have hope like that, and then a few fringy radicals can blast it out of the middle, and that makes everybody extreme again. Thankfully, Ireland has gotten through that. They've decided in Ireland, we're not going to let a bomb blow out the middle. That's a major accomplishment when a troubled area cannot let one mad person's bomb ruin the progress for the lion's share of the people who live there. So the Oslo Peace Accords 1993 were promising, but there was frustration afterwards from both sides. The Intifada II broke out, and the Intifada II led Israel to say, we're going to really play tough now, and we got to make a wall, and we've got to just control it in our own interest in a more heavy-handed way. Israel had 1,000 people killed by suicide bombers after Oslo, and they decided to make this wall in order to be safe from the suicide bombers. And since they built that wall, there's been almost no suicide bombs. Now, Palestinians would say that was the excuse for building the wall, and if we wanted to get through, we could, because the wall's just not even complete. But Palestinians have generally, I think, found, and this is the people I talk to, that it just makes more sense to work in a peaceful area instead of with the guerrilla violence that they had worked until this time. The fact is, there has not been a terrorist bombing or a suicide bomber coming in from the West Bank into Israel since 2008. More than 5 years without a single terrorist attack. That's unprecedented. You could thank the wall for that, or you could just thank a new positive spirit of let's find a solution to this without violence. I was there this year, and it was the 65th birthday of Israel, and it was a fun time in the streets. Everybody was just celebrating, flags were waving, and it was easy to get caught up into it. It was very exciting. It was also easy to get caught up in the euphoria in Palestine, because 1 year ago, the United Nations said Palestine can be called Palestine, the state of Palestine. And people were flying their flags in the West Bank. And I found all through my travels, it seemed local people just loved to say, welcome to Palestine. Everywhere I went, that was a fun thing to be able to say, welcome to Palestine. So this is a 1-year-old nation in a lot of ways as far as getting accepted in the family of nations, and that's big news. It's not that easy, and there's lots of military tension, and there's lots of soldiers everywhere you look. When you travel in the Middle East, you feel a military presence. Having said that, I don't believe I felt endangered. I can't think of, a couple of times I heard gunshots, and there was kids just annoying the border guards, and they throw rocks at them, and the guards shoot back. I don't know if they were shooting live anything, but it was just, that made me scared, and I thought, I'm going to go the other direction. But I just felt comfortable. I felt nervous the first time I went into Palestine, but then after a day I felt like, why was I nervous? You can imagine, my loved one says, you're going to the Holy Land, you're going to, you're not, Israel sounds nervous, but you're going into Palestine? Aren't you afraid? Isn't it dangerous? And I would say, well, as long as I'm not flying through Chicago, I think I'm going to be okay. You got to keep things in perspective. It is, compared to, I mean, you know, it's safe in Palestine. Statistically, it's safe. There's 4 million people that live there, and it's safe. If you're a tourist in Palestine, it is safe, period. Anybody could go there. You're going to have broken concrete. You're going to have ugly graffiti. You're going to have poor people. But you got money. It's safe. It's safe. It's tasty. It's friendly. It's educational. And I think it's good citizenship because we are responsible for a lot of the problems over there. And if we know better what's going on there, there's much, much more hope. I think the future discussion is going to be in the United States as much as in the Holy Land. It's going to be interesting. Now, if this is a popular map that you see when you travel around the West Bank. Israelis don't show this, but Palestinians do. And it illustrates how Palestinian land has shrunk since before the establishment of Israel. There's always been Jews in the Middle East. And a lot of people told me they lived in relative harmony until this last century. But now there's more aggression. But you can just see the green getting smaller and smaller and then smaller. We're going to talk about, from after the 67 war, we basically got this border now. Israel sharing with West Bank and Gaza. There's about 12 million people here. 8 million would be in Israel. Of those 8 million in Israel, 6 million are Jews, and 2 million would be Arab Israelis, legally with full citizenship. Some of them would say we got as much full citizenship as a Hispanic or Black American. That's full citizenship legally, but it's a challenge, you see. But the fact is, legally, you got 25% of Israel not being Jewish, and constitutionally or whatever, they got their rights. So that's 8 million, 6 million being Jewish. This is about 4 million, and it is like almost complete Arab. And of those Arabs, probably 90% of them are Muslim, and a small and shrinking minority would be Christian. It's interesting that most American evangelical Christians are just automatically pro-Israel, and they take a side, thinking that's the Christian thing to do. But the Christians are, I think, predominantly Palestinian. And it's just a fascinating thing to look at, and we'll talk about that as we go along. So they got this wall, and we got this persistent problem. If you go way, way back, you will see how deep-rooted the tensions are. Remember, Abraham came in 2000 BC. From there, we have the two tribes, Israelites and Arabs. Israelites were Jewish from about the start. Arabs were a pagan religion until Muhammad came in the 7th century. You see that in the museums, the beautiful menorahs and the beautiful historic artifacts of these civilizations in the museums in Israel. When you talk to the people, again, you find these are Muslim girls in Palestine. You'll talk to people speaking English, and they will give you their perspective. You'll talk to Christian families. The mayor of Bethlehem is Christian. The mayor of Ramallah, the de facto capital, is Christian. One of my guides was Christian. There's a lot of Christians that are movers and shakers, even though they're a small slice of the population in Palestine. So this is Simon Griffith. He's our producer. Carl Bauer is our cameraman. And together, along with another cameraman, Dean Cannon, we set out in 16 days to produce 2 TV shows. And I was going to get a little twofer out of it because we're going to come up with an hour special at the same time. But we always dedicate 6 days for 1 half-hour show. For public television, we produce a new series every 2 years, 13 shows. We went here planning to make a half-hour travel show on Israel and a half-hour travel show on Palestine, just treating them as travel destinations. And they're wonderful as travel destinations. I'm all over going to Israel and Palestine just as a tourist. I'm not all over people going to Israel as a tourist and then taking a little slip into Palestine to see Bethlehem and the Nativity Church and then getting back to Israel before anybody shoots you. Okay? That's the mindset of 90% of the tourists from America that go to the Holy Land. We want to go to Bethlehem, but why is it in Palestinian territory, So they have these arrangements where they take them in and they see that and they take them back. And here you got a society where the Israelis make 10 times as much money per capita as the Palestinians. And the rich Christians spend all their money in Israel. They go to Palestine, and they don't buy a single meal. It's just go to the church, buy a postcard, get back on your bus, and get back to Jerusalem. It's a very perplexing problem for me because I like to travel in a way that leaves some money with local communities. But I'm just saying, as a travel writer and as a tour guide and as tourists, Palestine is a great place to check out. So Simon and Carl and I wanted to make travel shows, one for Israel and one for Palestine, and then we wanted to get out of that a 1-hour special called The Holy Land, Israelis and Palestinians Today. And that's our more hard-hitting political show that's going to talk about some of these issues. And that will air all over the United States, God willing, or inshallah, in April. Okay, so we're going to be working hard on that in the next couple of months. It is not a pretty part of the world. I mean, we walked through a lot of garbage dumps and stepped over a lot of broken concrete and barbed wire and stray dogs, and it's a rough part of the world. It's just had a lot of heartache. And to go there, you need to get beyond that when you're going to assess how rich of a travel experience it is, because the people you meet and the things you talk about and the wonders that you experience just make the fact that it's a hard scrabble corner less important. I want to just go through our route here. In this talk, we're going to start in Jerusalem, and then we're going to go to Tel Aviv, and the airport is right about here. So when you fly into Israel, you fly about to the Tel Aviv airport there, and then you can take a taxi straight to Jerusalem or straight to Tel Aviv. This is all heavily populated along the coast. We're going to head north. Caesarea was a major Roman port 2,000 years ago. It was the major port in the east half of the Mediterranean. Haifa is a beautiful city. From there, we go inland to the Sea of Galilee, and this is where Jesus did his ministry for about 3 years. So many of the famous Bible stories that we know are set on the Sea of Galilee. And then the tourists will generally make a beeline back to Jerusalem on a highway that cuts right through the West Bank. Because, there's highways everywhere, and the West Bank is invisible from an Israeli point of view if you're just sticking to the main route. You just blast straight through there. And if you think about the scale, 50 miles, so Jerusalem to Sea of Galilee is about an hour-and-a-half drive. It's not tough to get around in a hurry. And then what we'll do is we will go from Jerusalem, we'll cross the wall into Bethlehem. And here you can see the West Bank. And again, it's about 20 miles wide and 50 miles tall. And we can go to Bethlehem, which is just a 10-minute drive from Jerusalem. Then we can go down to Hebron, the birthplace of Abraham, or the place where Abraham is buried. His tomb is there. We'll go below sea level to Jericho, one of the oldest cities ever, and then down to the Dead Sea. Oh yeah, before we'll hit down to Masada also. And then we'll go up to Nablus and finish in Ramallah. Shooting in Jerusalem is so exciting because you got all this beautiful glittering history around you. The Dome of the Rock marks the Temple Mount. And Temple Mount is from where Muhammad journeyed to heaven. In the Quran, it is where Abraham was going to sacrifice his son to prove his faith, a big deal for Judaism and Christianity. And today, when you go to there, you will find all of this history layered there. There's a shrine, which is a Muslim site on the top of the hill that is open to tourism, and it is for Muslim faithful. And then there is the remains of the great temple of the Jews, which was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. And what remains of that temple is only a couple of rocks down at the foundation of that whole platform. So very little remains. And this is the focal point for tourists, and this is the focal point for Jews. It's the most important synagogue in Judaism. It's outdoors. This is one of our guides, and he pointed out, here's the Temple Mount. That was the second temple. And just down here is what survives. And today, that is the important Western Wall. They call it the Western Wall, the nickname the Wailing Wall. Not a very respectful term, but people are praying there in this Jewish way where you bob and you find all sorts of people slipping prayers that are written down into the cracks of the stones that are the foundation of the temple. These stones are etched. There's a beautiful etching around the corner of them, and those are called Herod stones. You can identify a stone that has this etched corner and say it's from the reign of Herod 2,000 years ago. Here we have women worshiping, and then on the other side of the wall we have men worshiping. So traditionally you would have men and women separated like that in Judaism, in Islam, and until recently in Christianity. If you're a female photographer, you'll get shots of women praying. If you can tell who was the photographer on a TV show about Jerusalem by who you're seeing praying, because a woman couldn't get up close to film the men praying and vice versa. But those are the prayers. We knew to be there on a certain day when all the bar mitzvahs were there. And your guide will know when to go to the Western Wall, so it is really lively. And I'm impressed as a Christian tourist at the access, the accessibility. Anybody could get right up there. I could put on my yarmulke and do my on-camera right there at the Western Wall. Not a problem at all. There's very important security outside, obviously, because this would be a high-profile danger spot for many reasons, for both religions. This is one of our guides, A.B. and Simon, and we're deciding how we're going to do the on-camera. It was very complicated when you're doing a TV show talking about these issues, because the terminology is just critical. And you don't even know if you're going to say the word Palestine. Some people would rather have you say occupied territories, or some people say West Bank, or some people, Orthodox Jews would like you to call it Judea and Samaria, the biblical terms. And you can offend people by calling it Judea and Samaria, just like you can offend people by calling it Palestine. So it's a very complicated issue. Now, Jerusalem is circled, the old city is circled by an amazing wall, built in Ottoman times, but it was fit on the foundations of an ancient wall, less than a square mile. And you've got the 4 quarters in there: Armenian, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian. Easy walk, wonderful sightseeing, grand gates like this Damascus gate. Walk in there and it is just a marvelous setting from a travel point of view. Here we have the Dome of the Rock leading into the Muslim quarter. And the Muslim quarter, you'd have great Arabic coffee, and you'd have all sorts of beautiful Muslim treats to eat, and a real festive sort of spirit. And everybody there is just eager to talk to you, and they're proud of their culture. And I found that whether people were Jews or Christians or Muslims, they identified themselves by their religion, even if they were not practicing that religion. I'm a Christian. I don't go to church, but I'm a Christian because my family's Christian, and I'm going to marry a Christian. I'm a Muslim. Yeah, I don't believe in all that stuff, but I'm a Muslim, and I'm going to stay in that tribe, you see. It's fascinating to me. What is it fundamentally? Is it cultural, or is it religion, or is it economic, or what is the root of the problem? It's a very perplexing situation, but it's fun to wander through there as a traveler. And you get little subtle examples of the community. For instance, 5 times a day, the merchants in the Arab quarter will just drag a little something across their shop and go away to pray. So all the shops close down, and you just see, whatever they did to barricade it, but it's a feeling of community. It's a feeling of festivity. It's a feeling of trust, really. At the same time, you've got this parallel world of armed guards and Jewish flags and Muslim symbols and this sort of thing. So it's complicated for the visitor, but you are aware that you've got soldiers and guards around keeping the peace. While we were there, it was pretty calm. There wasn't a lot going on, so it was probably more relaxed than it might be at other times. But you see a lot of soldiers, and most of them are teenagers, and they're fresh off the boat. Half of Israel is first-generation immigrants, and these guys almost going into the army is like a cultural boot camp for them. Okay, the Christian quarter is famous for the Via Dolorosa. That's the road that Jesus walked with the cross. 12 stations of the cross, or 12 stops along there where Christian pilgrims will come and remember the suffering of their Savior. And the culmination of the Via Dolorosa, and you see these processions from all over Christendom going through there, and this really is a big deal. It's the culmination of a long journey for them, as many of them will come from Poland or Mexico or whatever, and they get to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built on the place where Jesus was believed to be crucified. And these churches it's interesting when you travel because, you're talking about Iraq, and you got Sunnis, and you got Shia, and so on. And you go to here, you got 7 different Christian sects. And then you go to there, and you got all these different Jewish interpretations, and so on. And every religion has the different stripes. And it's really apparent in the Holy Land because everybody is overtly religious. Not because they're overtly faithful, but it's because their culture and they're overlapping, and they just seem to be struggling to keep their head above water in a certain way. But you go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and you find 7 different denominations, mostly different Orthodox denominations controlling that church. And it's an amazing church to go into. It's very atmospheric. It's one of the most exciting churches I think you could go to. And there's candles and incense and pilgrims and passion all around you. And people lining up to stop. There's 3, I think, of the Stations of the Cross actually within that church. Of course, you got the place where Jesus was crucified. You've also got the slab that he was laid on when he was taken down off of the cross. And that would be a place that people would find very special. And you can see the 7 lamps on here representing the different religious groups that all find that holy, all the different Christian denominations. The Israeli quarter, or the Jewish quarter of the old town is, this is not a shot of it, but it looks kind of like this, is New Rocks. It's newly rebuilt because it was bombed and then scavenged and used as a quarry, and only in the last generation has it been rebuilt. And it just looks really modern, but all the same kind of uniform stone within the walls of the city. And the Armenian quarter is very, very tiny with very few people, and it's not very public, so most people never have any access or exchange with the Armenian quarter. Just outside of the wall, you've got some remnants of past strife. There was the Green Line. For many years, Israel was divided. Half of it was controlled by Jordan, half of it was controlled by Israel. And the Green Line was the front line. Today, the former Green Line, it's been a long time since the end of that war, the former Green Line is a famous shopping mall, the Ramallah Mall. And you can see it right here. And it's just a gorgeous look at modern Jerusalem. And it's important when we go to Jerusalem to remember there is the modern side of the city. The old city has, just a few tens of thousands of people, whereas the new city is 900,000 people or something like that. So you want to make a point to get out where people are living today. The markets are a lot of fun, very colorful. And the markets have fun insights. If you have a local guide, you'll know. Like when you go to London, you see the medallion on the shop and the Queen shops here, You've seen those probably when you go to Britain. Well, here you have medallions like this, and it says, this is so properly kosher that the most strict rabbi buys his stuff here, or something like that. This gets the seal of the approval from a certain rabbi who's got very high standards. So you get that sense as you walk through the market that there's a lot of the culture right there in the market scene. If you're interested in different dimensions of Judaism in Israel, you'll want to go to an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood. The most famous one is Mia Sharim. And here you find an example of, it'd be the same as a very fundamentalist group of Christians or a very, very strict group of Muslims. They have standards that are so strict that they would rather live apart in a lot of ways. They have certain expectations for their women. They want to raise their children in a certain standard, and they would just be more comfortable in their own neighborhood. It's a very interesting experience if you're not an Orthodox Jew or not Jewish at all to wander through there and try to learn just by looking. If you know what you're looking at, you can read a lot into the way people wear their hair and wear their hats and wear their clothes. Remember, Jews go from all different nations, so you got your Russian Jews, your Polish Jews, your Moroccan Jews, and they keep their culture once they're back in Israel. When you go into the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods, you realize different rabbis are like pop stars almost. I mean, they have a huge following. We were there when one of the old senior, most beloved rabbis died, and the whole city was shut down. There was so much traffic. Everybody was out because this man, this great rabbi, had died. Each rabbi has a different style, a different passion, and his followers will follow that. Some of them will have a little block on their head. And, if you were Jewish, you would understand exactly what that means. But it's something in the Torah that talked about keeping the scripture on your mind all the time. You should actually strap some of your holy lessons right there. And that's a good reminder. Christians would do something very similar. It's just different sects would have different focuses. So when you go to the little shops, you will see, as you would see pop stars in Europe, you will see the great rabbis with their posters, and people buy these and hang them in their dining room. I mentioned the army is filled with a lot of fresh off the boat young Israelis. Remember, Israel has a very welcoming and generous return policy, a welcome home policy, where anybody who's Jewish from around the world is welcome to move into Israel. They'll be set up, they'll be given education and subsidized in a certain way so they can get their bearings, and then within a generation they should be good, solid, Hebrew-speaking Jewish Israelis. You can imagine that in any society that's a melting pot. Israel is a melting pot, like beyond you can imagine what a melting pot is. I believe now is they just passed a threshold. Israel has more people, more Jews in Israel than were killed in the Holocaust. That was a real threshold. More than 6 million Jews now in Israel, and that's something to celebrate. People from all over difficult countries who are Jewish know that they can come to Israel and have a home. And today you'll find, I think, over half of the country's first generation. And remember, these people come in, they weren't necessarily up to speed on Jewish practices. They didn't speak Hebrew. They had no sense of what it is to be an Israeli. They may have been Jewish, but they didn't know what it was to be an Israeli. Every 18-year-old has to go into the military. I understand it's 3 years for boys, 1 year for girls. And I think it's several things. It's national security, it's a source of cheap labor, and it's a cultural boot camp. Because you got all these kids that don't even know the culture. You send them into the army for 3 years, they get out of there, and they are Israelis, you see. It's fascinating to look at the many different ethnicities in the young soldiers. And you see a lot of soldiers on the streets when you're in Israel. And you know these guys are all going to cultural boot camp. As a tourist, everywhere I went, as a curious tourist, I saw groups of teenage soldiers going there on field trips with teachers to learn about their heritage. This sign was instructive to me because it's in 4 languages. All over Israel, you see a sign in 3 languages, Arabic, English, and Hebrew, because you've got a third of the country being Arabs, or a quarter of the country being Arabs, and most of the people being Hebrew-speaking, and a lot of English for everybody else. But you got Russian here. Why is that? A lot of Russian tourists? No, there are certain places in Europe where you have Russian now because there's a lot of Russian tourists. Here it's because there's a lot of Israelis that speak Russian, and they've yet to learn Hebrew. So if they're going to get around, they better have Russian signs. So a lot of Russian immigration into Israel. We were there on Independence Day. And Independence Day is a wonderful time to be in Israel. And it's just barbecues. It's like the 4th of July plus, I think, you know. And I suppose when your nation was founded just 65 years ago, and when you're dealing with some pretty serious challenges, you're gonna celebrate your Independence Day with a certain kind of vigor. And it's just all of the parks smell like barbecues, and everybody's excited about getting together the next day. And we had a lot of fun on Independence Day. You would be oblivious to the fact that a mile away there's a big wall when you're celebrating Independence Day in Israel. And on the other side of the wall, they're also having a special day. And it's a sad day. It's a day called the Day of Catastrophe. So the day Israel was founded was a happy day for the Jews and a sad day for the Muslims. So again, that's pretty poignant. It's pretty poignant. From Jerusalem, it's easy to hop in your car or get a tour bus and go sightseeing. And there's all sorts of great things that you can see as you travel around. Just an hour away, you get to the Dead Sea. What are you? You're about 1,400 feet below sea level. And this shot is taken from the top of a mountain fortress called Masada. Masada. And Masada was a big palace of Herod's, and then it was turned into a last gasp refuge, a last stand for the Jewish rebels. And they barricaded themselves up there, and the Romans were going to get them. They couldn't get up, and rather than wait them out in a long siege, the Romans decided to literally build a big ramp up to the top of that mountain. And the Jewish rebels were up there, and they saw every day the ramp was getting closer to completion. And just before the Romans were going to break through, the Jews knew that they would be in for a life of slavery or worse. They committed mass suicide. And that was a horrible day in the story of the Jewish people. And I asked Jews today in 2013, why are you all dressed in black? And they said, we're still mourning the slaughter, the suicide at Masada and the destruction of our temple 70 years after Christ. So it's amazing how that's alive today. And the spirit of Masada is they will never take us. We'll never let ourselves get into a situation like we were in Masada where we had to commit suicide. That's a pretty powerful feeling, and that is clear when you're in Israel. There is that determination. To wander around up on top of Masada is really quite an interesting sightseeing experience. And then a good way to follow up that is to go back to Jerusalem and go to Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is probably the single most important museum/memorial that you should see when you go to Israel, because that's the memorial and the museum for the Holocaust, okay? And you can imagine it's a powerful thing. You can imagine it's almost an obligation for young Israelis and Israeli soldiers, and visiting dignitaries will be taken to Yad Vashem. It's the place that you remember the horror of the Holocaust. When we went there to film, we couldn't even get in the door without the director of the museum taking us and giving us quite extensive rundown on the importance and the symbolism of everything, because they wanted us to understand this is not just a museum. And the Holocaust wasn't just in the history books, you see. And it is an interesting thing for Israel now, because the last people who personally remember the Holocaust are dying. And a generation from now, what's going to happen? Does anybody really care about the Western Front in France and Germany anymore? Well, it's getting pretty distant, isn't it? And does anybody really care about Pearl Harbor like when we were all younger? You know, it's getting pretty distant. That's just the reality. And the Holocaust, if Israel loses track of the Holocaust, that's a very serious problem. And they're working very smartly and very determinedly to keep the lessons of the Holocaust alive. And this is filled with soldiers on field trips, getting their exposure to their heritage, because these guys just came off the boat from some distant land that didn't really care about that too much. There's, along with the museum, there are beautiful and poignant memorials. One is called the Hall of Names. And the whole idea here is just to give all of the victims of the Holocaust the dignity of being recorded and remembered. Because if they didn't try to do that, half of them or something would just be unnamed. So they got the Hall of Names, and there's a huge archive where everybody is documented, and then this very powerful collection of faces. And then the humanity of the Holocaust becomes apparent to you. Next to that, there's a memorial to the children. And this was new to me. I didn't realize a quarter of all the victims of the Holocaust, a quarter of the 6 million people killed in the Holocaust were children. Many different ethnicities, and to go there and to see these kids, and then you step into this hall with candles reflecting with all these mirrors, and it's supposed to be the 1.5 million flickering candles remembering all the children killed in the Holocaust. It's gripping. It is gripping. And it's just, to me, it's a necessary stop when you go to Israel. In the museum, they also had a section on the creation of modern Israel. And to me, I love pioneer movements, and I love settlers, and I love people courageously crossing a sea and going where they don't speak the language and starting something up. That's what America's all about, isn't it? I mean, we've all got some of that in our past, sooner or later. I just am so, charmed and excited about stories of my grandparents coming over and so on. Well, in Israel, it's a very big deal, and it's quite an inspirational deal. And in the museum, you learn how these original Zionists, whether it was in 1909 or later on after the Holocaust, they came to the shores and they turned sand dunes into great cities. It's quite a story. It is quite a story. And they actually had a lottery in 1909 in Tel Aviv, where the people all divvied up the land, and then they rolled up their sleeves and they created the great city of Tel Aviv. You stand at the edge of that memorial and you look out over the land and you think, oh man, I can see why they really love their land. If you talk to a Palestinian, they'll say you're looking out over a destroyed Palestinian village that used to have people in it, and now it's been plowed under and it's a forest. Just a generation ago. So every time you want to celebrate for one side, somebody with a different narrative comes in and ruins your party. And to get in there and to grapple with this, I think is very positive. It's very exciting. So we had a guide named Benny, a wonderful guy, and he was a former press officer for the Israeli military, so he knew the party line. And I I traveled with him in April, and then I traveled with him with our crew in our return last month. And we went with Benny in the Israeli-provided little minibus with a wonderful driver all over Israel. And Benny was there to help us with our script, and we were doing our best to show the story and give both narratives. Here we are standing in Jaffa, and you hear sometimes Tel Aviv/Jaffa. Well, Jaffa is the historic town. That's the Zionists' Ellis Island, where all of these ships would dock. Before the age of airplanes, you didn't go to Israel without landing in Jaffa. That's where you land. Today, Jaffa is more of a park and a touristy area, and you stand there and you look at Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is like the Manhattan of Israel. It's an amazing city, and it is amazing to think that 100 years ago it was sand dunes. Now, and you can go to museums and you can see the very first houses and how the people built these. And okay, so we're off and running, and when you drive around Israel, it feels like you're driving around California. The roads they just feel like you'd find here, and things go very fast because distances are so short. And a little ways up the coast, we get to a Roman site. This is Caesarea, and Caesarea was a major port, one of the most important ports of the Mediterranean 2,000 years ago. A little further up, we come to a wonderful city called Haifa. If you're Baha'i, or if you have Baha'i friends, you know this is a very important place for Baha'is because this is the Baha'i shrine. They're surrounded by this beautiful garden. And Baha'u'llah, he's the prophet for Baha'i, he went up one notch in my estimate, because I realized when I was in Jerusalem that they chose not to put him on the Temple Mount, because that would have just added more complexity to the situation. So nobody is having to struggle with this. This is for the Baha'is, which I thought was a very good deal. And the Baha'is are all about, let's just live together and be peaceful anyway. So I think that was in keeping with their teaching. Haifa itself is a thriving modern city with a modern industry, and it is a model of Muslim or Arab Israelis working together with Jewish Israelis. And you talk to people, and a lot of them are just like, we don't want the baggage of our parents. We want to get together and just work hard and enjoy life and raise our kids, celebrating diversity. It's a hopeful area, and when you go to Haifa, make a point to get out into the cafe scene and talk to people. Everybody likes to talk, and I just thought it was a lot of fun to be in Haifa. While we were traveling around, I found the food was wonderful, and it's like food is love, and people just want to keep loving you. And I learned it was frustrating, actually, because we ate in a lot of people's homes, and the food kept coming, and I don't like to waste food, so I kept eating it, and it kept coming. And then they told me, no, it does keep coming until you leave your plate full, and then it can't come anymore. So if you find yourself in aggressive hospitality situation, just stop eating, and you gotta leave food on your plate. But it's all the meze, the little dippy food and so on, and it was just delicious. And it's almost like a celebration of how fertile we've made the land. Israel talks about how they took desert and turned it into orchards. Israel is really good at desalinating the Mediterranean and irrigating and all this sort of thing, and they'll brag about that, and they will celebrate that by having all of this fresh and tasty produce. About an hour away, we go inland, we go below sea level, and we come to the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee, of course, is the focal point for most Christian tourists that are going to Israel. And when you go to Israel, you'll want to see Jerusalem, and you want to see Bethlehem, and then you want to go up to the Sea of Galilee. Jesus lived about 30 years or something, and he had 3 years of ministry at the end of his life, and most of that was done right here on the Sea of Galilee. And if you went to Sunday school or you were paying attention to all the Bible stories and so on, man, they're all right here. It's amazing. And every couple of miles, there's a famous site. And I'll tell you, it was packed with tourists, and there was Christian groups from all over the world there. Lots from Africa, lots from Asia, lots from Latin America, lots from former Soviet Union. And it's just a beautiful place if you have a Christian heritage or if you're a Christian. This is the Sea of Galilee from the Sea of Tiberias, named after the Roman emperor. And this was the view from my window. And it's a very good headquarters when you're in the Sea of Galilee area. And they've got touristy Jesus boats, Every tourist can get on a Jesus boat. I doubt if Jesus would have called it that, but there actually is a Jesus boat that you can see. It's in one of the kibbutzes there. It's in a little museum, and this is a boat excavated, and they've tested it, and it goes back to the 1st century. So, if Jesus was out there on the Sea of Galilee, calming the waters and making fishermen turn into fishermen, into fishers of men, it would have been with a boat like this. And you can see the boat, and that's quite exciting. Also, you can go to the Church of the Beatitudes on the Mount Beatitudes. Beatitude, I think, is the Latin word for blessing. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the peacemakers. All of the blessings that Jesus gave in the Sermon on the Mount, and also the Lord's Prayer was first given there. So you will want to, if you're on a Christian pilgrimage, for sure, go to the Mount of Beatitudes. And there's a beautiful church there. And as we were filming, it was very emotional to see all of these groups from the developing world coming there on Christian group tours. The main part of tourism in Israel is Christian group tourism, I believe. And it was just fun to see all the groups there really having a beautiful time. And then 3 miles away would be another site. I mean, this is the beach where you have Menza Christi. That's the church where Jesus said, Peter, feed my sheep after Jesus resurrected. And that's the reason Peter was considered the founder of the first pope. The primacy of St. Peter is because of that dinner right there. This is where Jesus calmed the waters, where he fed the masses with a few loaves of bread and fish and so on. And you'll find all the Christian groups there singing and worshiping along the shores of the Sea of Galilee. This is the Menza Christi. That's very important for Catholics. It's called the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter because, again, that's where Jesus said, Peter, feed my sheep. I'm out of here. You're in charge on earth, okay? And it's a very, very important spot for Catholic pilgrims. And to have your Jewish guide read the Bible to you right there is a beautiful experience. And it was impressive to me how everybody was into that history and that the happenings right there in Galilee. Nearby is the Jordan River. And the Jordan River is famous because John the Baptist baptized Jesus there. So, especially Christian denominations that are really into like exuberant baptisms, they'll go there in masses. And you'll find people lining up in their white robes and getting dunked and dunked and dunked. And it's quite a spectacle regardless of your faith. Overlooking the Sea of Galilee is the Golan Heights. Now we've heard of the Golan Heights because it was always in the news, because it's strategic, right? Syria held it. And for a generation, Syria had this pillbox, and they could lob mortars and gunshot and so on down onto the orchards and the schools and the kibbutzes and the villages. Israel didn't like that. So in 1967, I mentioned they had the Six-Day War. They took all that high ground and pushed Syria back off of the mountain. So you can go there today, and it's an Israeli celebration. It's an Israeli victory. And I was there with our guide, and he would tell us how we're going to talk about it here and the importance of that. And we'd debate the script, and we'd work on that. And then I'd sit down with Simon, and we'd say, now, how do we want to describe this for the needs of our TV show? And it was just a fascinating process to get that whole Golan Heights and the high country and Israel and the Arabs and all this stuff figured out. And then we would set up the cameras, and we would shoot it. We could go into that pillbox, and we could look out, and you could imagine how the Syrians felt when they had the high ground, and when the Israelis were down below, having to, duck for cover whenever the Syrians wanted to lob some bombs on them. And then you can imagine how great it was for Israel to retake that high ground, or to take that high ground. There's memorials for different war sites up there. There's a United Nations base right on the border of Syria, because that's a troubled border. And as travelers, you can go right to the border. And there's a place called Mount Bentel nearby, which is really on top of a mountain with all sorts of trenches and military listening gear and so on that I was surprised was wide open, even though the war in Syria was going on. From here, I was impressed by how close things are. Look, from this point, Damascus is just 60 kilometers away, 36 miles to Damascus. Our guide told us when Israel took Mount Bentel, they had a straight shot to Damascus. They could have taken Damascus, but Israel didn't want to be, having to be in control of a giant Muslim city. But they solidified their border in the high ground, so they would no longer have those guys looking down on them. So there's a coffee shop up there called Cafe Annan, sort of because Kofi Annan worked there when he was before he was the head of the United Nations. To remember that. And you got this sort of perky, proud Israeli gusto up there, you know, guns and Moses and T-shirts that list all the nations that have wanted to destroy Israel and the fact that they're all gone and Israel is still there. So there's that spunkiness that is quite interesting when you're in Israel. And you see that spunkiness showing itself in the vigor in which they're building settlements on Palestinian territory on the other side of the wall. So this is the crux of another serious problem, the fact that 500,000 Israelis are living in quite nice settlements in Palestinian territory, according to the international border between West Bank and Israel. Settlements. We talked to a lot of people. We went into a lot of settlements. Again, we have the shrinking territory controlled by Arabs over the last 60 years. And this is the territory, roughly, that people can envision being a viable two-state system. If you have a contiguous West Bank, a Gaza Strip, and some kind of a connection with some access to Jerusalem, which Palestine wants as its capital, but it'll always be primarily Jewish. But if there can be an East Jerusalem capital for Palestine and a viable, for sure, contiguous West Bank, we can talk about a two-state system. But what's happening in the last few years is the West Bank, you still got the border there, but according to this map, which would show it from a Palestinian narrative, you've got enclaves that are Muslim and Palestinian, and the rest of it is de facto controlled by Israel, with border crossings, checkpoints, freeway infrastructure, settlements, and so on. So this is the problem today. And when you talk to people from different sides, you get a whole different perspective on it. And that's our challenge, is to figure that out. So when you see the settlements, when you look on the horizon, if it's cookie cutter, modern, looks like a planned community, it is Israeli, even if it's deep in Palestine. If it's higgly-piggly, it's going to be Palestinian. Also, Palestinians, of course, will have a minaret at night with a green light on it. It's quite nice to drive around at night, and you can see the settlements with a bright ring of lights around them, a periphery. That would be a Jewish settlement, because the streets are dark unless you're driving under a settlement, in which case everything's well lit. Or if you see a green light on the horizon, that would be a minaret. So to drive around there is quite interesting. You see, when you drive, little tiny, just like a seed of a settlement. And a Palestinian will tell you, that's the beginning of a settlement. In 5 years, there'll be 30,000 people here, conceivably. Some of them are illegal. Some of them, Israel says, no, you're not supposed to go there. But remember, Israel is dealing with a problem within its midst. Who are the guys that killed Yitzhak Rabin? These are the extreme Zionists. They don't want to call it West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria, and it is it's God's will that they're fulfilling by occupying it for Jewish people, for Israel, you see. So that's this extreme settler Zionist thing. Now, there's different reasons that 500,000 Israelis are settling in Palestine. Some are doing it because they're Zionists and they think this is rightfully Israel's land and it should be called Judea and Samaria, and we're here because it's God's will. And if you believe that, it makes sense what they're doing. Other people are doing it because they're a young family. They don't have a lot of money, and Israel's built all this, and they want to populate it, and Israel gives you subsidies in many different ways to live there. And then if you're a struggling young family wanting to give a nice, comfortable place for your kids that's safe, that's back to nature, that doesn't have people that are of different ethnicities all around you and so on, a settlement can be quite appealing, you can imagine. There's different reasons to live in a settlement. But these are the settlements oftentimes that would be started by Zionists, and they're illegal at first, but then they become legal. And then once they're established, there's a notion that this is a settlement that's established. It has a natural need to grow. And that's something that, from a Palestinian point of view, is very frustrating. You had a little settlement up there, and it's growing and growing and growing. Well, it's a natural thing. It's a community that has to grow, you see. So that's another struggle. But you see this all over the place, the incredible build up. And you go into these settlements, and you walk, as an American, I can go up. It's like a fancy gated community in America with security. Understandably, you want security. I would want security. If I was a Jewish person raising my family in a settlement, I'd want to know who's coming and going at night. As an American, I can walk up there, and they just let me walk right in. And then I was very impressed by how we could hang out in the playground and play with kids. We could talk to people. We could take photographs of people. Everybody invited us in. It was very, very Andy of Mayberry, you know. It was just very, very charming. I thought it was a wonderful place to call home if you wanted that sort of controlled community. This is graffiti that you would find in an Israeli settlement, and it would say, this is Hetzl. He's the founder of Zionism that I talked about. And it would say something like in Hebrew, let's make the dream come true. Because it's quite a dream to establish the historic homeland for the Jewish people. And you have a little shopping arcade in every settlement, and people in their nice cafes and restaurants, and it was quite comfortable. We hung out in this place for a while, and my goal was to talk to some settlers who were happy to talk to us. And they were very smart, knew exactly why they were there, and knew just the reason why it was right that this settlement was here. It was really interesting as a traveler to be able to talk to different people. We went into 3 or 4 different settlements. This man was happy to talk to us. He was there, he said, because it was back to nature. He could see the stars at night. It was very quiet, very peaceful, surrounded by very beautiful orchards and very fertile land. So we talked to him and found out about that. Got to play with a lot of kids. Met this guy that just bought his house a month before, and he was happy to invite us in, and we sat on his balcony with him and talked. And he said, well, look at these hills over there. They're empty. They're just, nobody's using them. But we have the economic might and the technical wherewithal to irrigate it and develop it and pipe in water, and the land will flower. That makes sense from his point of view. I asked him, what is the solution to this problem? He said, well, all the Muslims here should move to Jordan. That's their people, you see. So that's one perspective that he would say. I asked him, have you ever talked, do you have any friends that are Muslims or Palestinians? No. That was one of the saddest things for me. Beautiful Israelis, beautiful Palestinians, they never had a chance to talk to each other. Not at all. I knew more about the other side of the wall than they did, time and time again. When you have that wall, I think an unintended consequence of that wall is it keeps people from talking to each other. And when people can't talk to each other, it's easy to be afraid of them. If you never met a gay person, if you never met an Arab or a Muslim, if you never met somebody who's different, it's understandable that somebody could mess up your perspective about that. And then you meet them and you realize we got stuff in common here. I mean, it's very interesting. Most Europeans, if you don't have your big city that you have a soccer team that you support, if you're too small of a city, you adopt another city. And you support, Manchester, or you support Rome or something like that. Barcelona has a great soccer team. And the Palestinians generally support Barcelona. And the Israelis generally support Barcelona. In both towns, you got Barcelona football paraphernalia. And they have no idea that they're rooting for the same team. If somebody could just say, hey, there's a game, let's just all get together and watch the game. But they can't. They can't because of the entrappings of their culture and their history. Our driver invited us to his house on Independence Day, and it was great just to go into a house of an Israeli family and see how they had all the same aspirations as you and I do here. Talk to their family, talk to the kids. One of the girls just got married, so she had all of her wedding portraits there. And it was a reminder to me, how you can be married as a modern Jewish Israeli, but you are Moroccan and your spouse is Russian, all right? And you will have all of those added to the wedding party. So there's a lot of variety and diversity in all those festivals. When an Israeli builds a house, his first concern is a safe room and sniper-proof, walls and windows on the dangerous side. That's just the reality for them from their history. When a Palestinian builds a house, his first concern is a water cistern, because Israel controls the water. I found, or I was told, that houses that had water tanks on the roof were likely Palestinian houses. And houses without were Israeli houses, because Israelis have access to all the water infrastructure, all they want, whereas the Palestinians would get access to the water a couple times a week, and they got to fill up their tanks and using it sparingly. And if ever Israel needed to crank it up, they could turn the water off, you see. So that's a very effective way to control people who might be a problem for your national security. But it is a powerful thing, water politics, and water is a big deal. It came up in conversations all the time, water. You'd be in the middle of the desert in Palestine, you'd see a water plant, you'd see barbed wire around it, and you'd know that's not a Palestinian water plant. You'd talk to Bedouins, and they grew up thinking of sweet spring water that they would go to with their family. And now they have to buy harsh, desalinated water from the Mediterranean. And it's a very expensive thing for them. So, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but it's a very serious and complicated issue when you travel and try to live in that area. Okay, so you can travel into Palestine. I just want to stress that. It's wide open for tourism. I went there with the support of the Israeli Tourist Board. I told them I'm going to make a show on Palestine. They said, fine. We hope you're not overly political, but, fine. And I got very good support from the Israeli Tourist Board. They were cool. And they told me, if you can support tourism in Palestine, that's good for us, because when Palestine can get its act together economically, everybody will be a lot better off. So that was positive, I thought. And I just want to remind people, anybody can go to Palestine and travel this way. So one of the most poignant moments for me, when I was traveling with our crew from Israel over to Palestine. We're done with Israel, we're going into Palestine. How do you go from one driver to the next, from one guide to the next? Because they can't connect very easily. There's one restaurant that's famous outside of Bethlehem that has a parking lot where people with green Palestinian license plates and people with yellow Israeli license plates can both go. They all knew about it. We'll see you at that restaurant, I forget the name. But then we got there and we did the transfer. We went with our gear and hello, and I got to introduce my Israeli guide to my Palestinian guide. And I just took great joy in letting two good people exchange business cards, because they would not have met each other any other way. It just seems so maddening that there are structural things designed to keep people apart when they want to get together. They both want to get together. They both want to live together. I remember on my first trip, when my Palestinian driver dropped me at a turnaround, it's like you have to meet at, 4th and Alder. I mean, that's where you can double park, because both people can go there, and that's really what happens. So we went there, and then a few minutes later, my Israeli guide picks me up, and I was just like luggage going from one car to the next. And I remember they shook hands, and they just said, Shalom. I just thought, this is a kernel of hope, but they can't get together. It must be maddening for them, because there's a lot of people in the middle that realize violence isn't going to work, and if they can just get together without being made extreme. So coming into Palestine, you see a lot of this. You didn't see that before. That's the Palestinian flag. This is a big deal. A lot of Israelis don't like it. A lot of Palestinians love it. This is old Bethlehem. When you get to Bethlehem today, there's really nothing charming about it. It's just a sprawling city that sort of butts up against Jerusalem. It's just a 10-minute drive if you didn't have the border from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And then this is the Minister of Tourism, and a beautiful woman that helped us out. This is my guide, Kamal, and the President Abbas, and Arafat in the Ministry of Tourism's office. Palestine was all excited about us doing this show. We're going to call it Palestine, that's a big deal. They provided us a car, but that was all they could afford to provide us. So, but I was happy just to have their support, and they got us into the sites we needed to get into. We had a big dinner with the people from the tourist board, my guide, Hassam, Simon, our producer, Dean, one of our cameramen, and Kamal, our other guide. The script was ready to go. We had a huge feast in this Palestinian restaurant, and at the end, I got to pay the bill. I thought this is great. They just didn't have any money. I've never had that happen before when I'm hosted by the tourist board, but I thought, this is Palestine, okay. And this is the woman who is the Palestinian Minister of Tourism. She gave President Obama a private tour of the Church of the Nativity. And she was instructed not to be political, but she said she read a political passage out of the Bible, and Obama gave her a wink. But to talk to the Minister of Tourism and to hear her concerns, for me as a person who's into tourism, you know, it was fascinating. Her job is to encourage tourism to Palestine. And she lives in a country where there's no airport, where you can't cross the border reliably, where you don't have access to any waterfront. No lake, no river, no seafront, except Gaza, but in West Bank, no waterfront. Very frustrating. If you are from a Muslim nation that is angry with Israel, that doesn't accept Israel's right, understandably, I think, Israel will not let you fly into Tel Aviv. So you got to fly into Amman. And then you got to cross over the bridge, and that can shut down for no notice for days at a time. So if you're trying to do something in Palestine, it's hard to get it. It's hard to organize it. The poignant thing about Bethlehem skyline is crosses and crescents. It's a city that is both Muslim and Christian. It's more Muslim than Christian, but it's got a lot of Christian heritage. We'd go to the top of the biggest hotel for a nice wide shot of the Church of the Nativity. And when you go to the Church of the Nativity, it's on Manger Square, where Jesus was born. There's a mosque across the street facing the same square, celebrating this is the place Jesus was born. And then you realize, oh yeah, for 1,400 years, Muslims have been worshiping here too, because Jesus is an important prophet in the Muslim faith, and Mary is really a big deal. There's even a book in the Quran named after Mary. So this is an important place for Muslims. We got to hang out and talk with the imam there. That was very interesting. Wandered through the Muslim quarter, and Bethlehem is great from a Muslim point of view. Visited our guide's home and learned about the Christian minority in Bethlehem. As I mentioned, the mayor of Bethlehem is Christian, the minister of tourism is Christian, but the Christian population in Palestine is down to well under 10%. I've heard a lot of different numbers, but it's a shrinking minority, and the churches, they feel like fortresses. They're very secure, very fortified. It's scary. There are extremists in all religions, fundamentalists that just can't handle that somebody might see it differently than they do, and you don't know what the future holds. It's a sad thing to see mosques, synagogues, and churches having to be fortified. This is Reverend Mitri Raheb. He's a very charismatic and busy and important pastor, a Lutheran pastor, right there in the Christmas church in Bethlehem. And he's very busy bringing the communities together with all of his programs and providing a good Christian presence. When I was there, I met a bunch of Lutheran pastors that were staying at the Lutheran Church guest house. That's where we stayed. And just a beautiful sort of opportunity for Christian tourism to get into Palestine and do something more than just go to Bethlehem, but actually travel around Palestine. Of course, this is the place 2,000 years ago where the first Christmas was, and you can go to the Church of the Nativity, tiny door into this great church. Inside, it's a 1,000-year-old church, and you've got pilgrims from all over Christendom coming in and worshiping and praying and kissing and blessing the spot where Jesus was born on that first Christmas. A big part of the tourist souvenir trade is going to be carved olive wood. And that would be traditionally done by Christians, as Muslims are less inclined to carve images than Christians. And near Bethlehem is the most beautiful national park in Palestine. It's called Batir. And Batir is where we're going to head next. We're going to be traveling around West Bank in the last half of our talk. And we're going to take about a 10-minute break or so. Before you break, I'd like to just make a couple of announcements, because we've been co-sponsored today by three different organizations. The United Nations Association is here, and the World Affairs Council is here, and Bread for the World is here. The United Nations Association and the World Affairs Council, I've worked a lot with them in the past, and they are just as enthusiastic in their mission as we are in our mission of connecting Americans with the rest of the world by helping people be more inclined to build bridges and less inclined to build walls. And their difference is they bring the rest of the world here to our community, whereas we put people on tours over there or give guidebooks for over there. If you want to learn more about the work of the United Nations Association here in Seattle, or the World Affairs Council here in Seattle, their booths are out there, and during the break you might want to drop by and pick up their stuff. Also, each year I have a Christmas fundraiser for Bread for the World, because I think all of us care about people who are struggling, especially during holiday time, and a lot of Americans don't understand what advocacy is all about. Charity is good, developmental aid is good, but I think something called advocacy is really good, and that is just providing a voice for hungry and homeless people in our government. There's nobody lobbying for hungry people in Washington, D.C. So if you're interested in that, I've been a member of Bread for the World for 30 years, and I just love the work they do. I feel like for whatever money I can give them, it leverages it in a way that is just hard to imagine. I mean, just a little help to them, then they speak up for hungry people in Washington, D.C., and they make a world of difference. Every year we do a fundraiser. I've got my Christmas package. It's the Christmas CD, the Christmas coffee table book, and the Christmas DVD that we made for our Christmas special a few years ago on public television. And I give it to people who will give $100 to Bread for the World. And this year I'm matching that also. I really want to give Bread for the World a boost. So with my company, we're going to give up to $100,000, and we fully expect to make that with your help. If you'd like to give to empower a lobby organization in Washington, D.C. to speak up for hungry people, learn more about Bread for the World. And if you'd like to give them a little support this holiday season, this is a chance where I'll match it, so your $100 will give them $200, and we'll send you these 3 very cool gifts at the same time. So that's printed over there, or it's in the lobby. You can pick that up, and Bread for the World is here too. I just love the work of Bread for the World. Let's take, we're gonna go, I'm gonna be a little quicker in the last step, but we still gotta go all the way through the West Bank, and let's take a 10-minute break, and then we will carry on, okay? 10 minutes, thank you. Somebody asked me out there if we're going to do tours of Palestine and Israel. We're not going to do tours of Palestine and Israel, but every time I go there, I'm just so tempted to do it. But it would be mission creep, I think, for my operation. But what I want, because we just want to focus on Europe, but what I do want to do is have a landing page on our website to promote good organizations that are leading tours already, providing both narratives. I think there are people that understand you're just not going to get anywhere by preaching to the choir. You need to provide both narratives and then let people draw their own conclusions. And there are organizations that are doing that, and I think it's very constructive. Just like after our Iran TV show, we had a landing page, and many people went to Iran having been inspired by that from watching our show. We'll find good people, and they'll be on our website. This is just the kickoff of this whole thing for us, because we just got back, and I just crazily booked this, long 6 months ago, thinking I'd be all ready to jump in. But we're just actually going through all of our footage now, and over the winter we'll be making the show. It should air nationally in April. So, and we'll have a lot of information then. I'm sure I'll be giving this talk in different locations that way, and this talk will probably be available as a streaming thing online. The closest thing we do in our program, and I forgot to mention our little brochures. I've got a table out there also with 2 of our tour guides out there to answer any questions. But we take tours all over Europe, and we do a lot of tours to Turkey. And it's really good to get a look at a secular, moderate Muslim country that's sort of westward looking, and Turkey's a great example of that. When I was in Palestine, we were talking about how is Palestine relative to other Muslim countries, and they said, except for Turkey, we consider us to be the most liberal or progressive Muslim state. So Turkey is famously, progressive, or whatever you want to call it, and Palestine is right up there with it. But we've got our brochure about that and our newsletter. Also, we've got our book, Travel as a Political Act, which I've written after 30 years of this kind of travel, and it's been very interesting for people that want to learn more about the value of travel from a broadening your perspective point of view. Okay, so now we're going to carry on and go through the West Bank, and when we look at these terraces, they're called biblical terraces because they go back to Bible times, 2,000 years ago. And it's just amazing to think that people have been working these fields and lovingly terracing these hillsides, and grazing their animals and harvesting their crops. Olives are precious to the culture. We went out here. It's a national park. I was scouting around and I wanted to find, a beautiful part of the countryside of Palestine, and this really is one of the best. Batir, it's called. So we figured out, we took a little hike and shared that on our TV show. And then we visited some families that were harvesting the olives. We were there in October. It was olive harvest time. And everywhere we looked as we were driving around Palestine, you could see people putting blankets down. The whole family was out, 3 generations, climbing up the olive trees, picking their olives. And it was sort of it was more than just a harvest. It was something that was a celebration together, and it was an affirmation of their closeness to the land. One thing I heard time and time again is the people in Palestine were not very industrious. They didn't really turn their land into rich stuff. And I just thought, that's an ethnocentric point of view. I might look at it and judge somebody by not having the Protestant work ethic or something like that, but maybe it's their land and they don't want to get rich off of it. Maybe they just want to live on it, and it is a judgmental thing to say they don't turn it into something industrious, therefore it's less theirs. I think that's an interesting part of the discussion. And when you see people harvesting their olives like they did 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago with almost no change, it is quite a beautiful thing. It's not, nobody's going to get filthy rich on that, but it's a sustainable, beautiful, beautiful ritual. So we had a good time looking through the countryside, and then we went back to Bethlehem. The main square in Bethlehem has a monument that is remembering local people that are serving life in prison terms in Israel. And these are terrorists, or these are freedom fighters, or these are people who got on the wrong side of the local police and did something. They're violent. They're probably violent Palestinians working for that cause, but who knows? But the fact is, there's a lot of people here who are considered freedom fighters or martyrs, who other people would consider terrorists, and they're doing life in prison. They're remembered that way. And this is where you start to get the edge. And you need to balance your sightseeing with a little bit of what I consider reality travel. You need to walk along the wall and look at the political graffiti. And you look at this guy and you think, what's it like to be a young kid growing up in a land where he doesn't figure he's got too much hope? Maybe he should just be an industrious and make it happen, but maybe he's been kept down. And maybe there's nothing for the kids to do but annoy the Israeli soldiers. I mean, it seems like that's what kids do, is they throw rocks at Israeli soldiers. And Israelis get pissed off and they shoot buckshot at them or shoot up in the air or who knows what. But I found when I was traveling, there was a lot of this kind of stuff going on. Bethlehem has the wall right there, and then every day there's a lot of people that go into Jerusalem who have work permits to have good jobs, and then every night there's rush hour back into Bethlehem where they will go back to their communities. It's a lot like Tijuana and San Diego. If you've been across that wall, it was very reminiscent. I was there filming, and this is the first time I crossed this wall, I was very nervous. And I've crossed it 4 or 5 times now, and it's very routine now. You just walk through the turnstile. If you've got an American passport, you can do whatever you want. We were on this side of the wall. I asked my Palestinian friends, is it okay to film here? And they said, we can do anything we want on this side of the wall. They just don't seem to care. We could do whatever we want. We took a while to get comfortable doing that. But we walked right up to the turnstile with our big camera, and I walked around 2 or 3 times just to get it right. And the guard was playing his games on his mobile device, and it just seemed very mellow. And then a big bus come, and all these guys who were workers would go back home, having worked in the rich country for pretty good wages to take home. It's that kind of dynamic. And you get that sort of dynamic at borders between rich and poor countries all over the world. Okay, the West Bank, everybody has a different take on this, so I don't know what the right narrative is, but I'll tell you that an international community has pretty much agreed that there is a border, and the border is different than the wall. It doesn't show very well on this, but there's a border that's agreed where the Palestinians are supposed to live between the Jordan River, Jerusalem, and where most Palestinians live these days. And the wall that Israel has built in the name of defense after the Second Intifada, when there was so much, when 1,000 Israelis were killed by suicide bombers, they built this wall in the name of defense. and the wall is twice as long as the border. Now that's an odd thing to me. You can't dispute. Here's the border, here's the wall. The wall is twice as long, and all of it is on the Palestinian side, not fudging on the Israeli side. So we know the term gerrymander, don't we, from our political problems. Gerrymander seems very apropos for how they did this wall. If there's a historic site, an aquifer, a nice place for a settlement, whatever, the wall can grab it and come back. So from a Palestinian narrative, the wall speaks more loudly than the declarations from Israel about what their intentions are. There's a border, there's a wall. Now, when you look at West Bank, it's got 3 different zones. And I won't talk to you about what all the different zones are in detail, but basically A, B, and C. A is where most of the Palestinian people live. It's enclaves of the cities, surrounded by B, which is the infrastructure, and C, which is the vast stretches of uninhabited land, or mostly uninhabited land. It's not uninhabited, but it's lesser inhabited. Okay, the great thing about this, if you are concerned about Israeli security, is that if there's some kind of a violent attack from some Palestinian city, you can shut down B, and all the A's are isolated islands, and nobody can get between them and communicate. Do you follow me? So if you're in charge of Israeli security, this is exactly what you need. You can turn it off and turn it on. If there's any trouble coming out of Palestine, all of a sudden, all the border stations are activated, and it takes you all day to get from here to there, when it would normally take half an hour. This is the reality for the people that live there, and the Israeli perspective would be, because we know it's inconvenient, and we're sorry about that, and I'm sure a lot of you have nothing to do with the violent attacks, but we are moving aggressively to protect our families, all right? So that would be that narrative, and if you're one of the millions of people who have to live with that, you don't know if you can get from A to B in 1 hour or 4 hours. It all depends on the mood of the guard. When we were traveling along, it was a very easygoing time, so we could go everywhere without stopping. Whenever we were stopped, we'd show our American passport and go straight through, even if we had green Palestinian license plates. So we're going to go right now from Bethlehem to Hebron, where the tomb of Abraham is. Then we're going to go from Bethlehem down to Jericho and see the Dead Sea. And then we're going to go to Nablus and finish in Ramallah. Remember, Jerusalem is the big city here, 1 million people. Ramallah and Bethlehem are almost like suburbs, but they're divided by the wall, so it's a world away in a lot of ways. We got the Jordan River. There's Amman. You can see the lights of Amman from here. That's the big, Arab Muslim capital nearby. From Israel's point of view, the wall is landscaped, and it's something that you can almost ignore. And on the other side of the wall, it looks like this, completely covered with, or just lots of powerful and angry graffiti. There are romantic visions of hijackers and terrorists and freedom fighters that people will celebrate as local heroes, as we would if we were fighting some big empire. And we had the opportunity and the challenge, and I think the privilege of traveling through the West Bank and trying to sort it out. Talking with Palestinians and talking with Israelis about that wall, even the terminology is important. Israel does not like to call it a wall, they call it a security fence. They say only parts of it are really a wall, the rest of it is a fence. Well, okay, that would be that perspective. From a Palestinian perspective, always Palestinians love to take visitors up to show you where the wall divided their land. Whether it's a wall or a barbed wire or a fence, it does the same sort of thing. The big issue for me when I was traveling around there was the infrastructure. It was fascinating to study the infrastructure, and we got to film it, and we tried to film a little nerve-wracking filming border crossings and that sort of thing, but we got plenty of good footage showing these stations. They're all over the country. You don't know if anybody's in there or not, and the point is, when they need to be there, bam, the whole place can be fortified and locked down. It is quite routine for kids to be out blocking streets, burning tires, and throwing rocks. These are kids that, we played pick-up baseball after school, and they throw rocks at Israeli soldiers after school. It's, these kids, it's a rough world. They feel like they're living in an occupation. That's the odd thing. I mean, it kept occurring to me, I never even imagined what it was like to live being occupied. But these people From their point of view, they feel like they're living in an occupation. Palestinians have security forces. And the main job of the security of these forces these days, the Palestinian security forces, is to work with the Israeli security forces so the kids don't get into trouble. See, the Palestinians are trying to keep their own kids from breaking things and throwing rocks because it's just going to set back the peace process. From talking to people in Palestine, I have a strong feeling that they realize, whether they believe in violence or not, that pragmatically, the best solution for them is to try to be nonviolent and find a way to sort this out peacefully. That would be the West Bank approach. Hamas is a different government, and that's in Gaza Strip, and that would be probably a different story. When you look at the West Bank, it is carved by beautiful infrastructure. And these are super freeways zipping across, so if you live in a settlement, or if you want to cut from here to there, you can do it easily. And then on the hilltops would be a lot of settlements. But I was very impressed by the quality of the roads. And the roads are accessible to everybody, generally, as long as times are good. And when I was there, times were good, and yellow and green plates were going lickety-split all over the place. Israelis cannot go into Palestinian cities. There's a red sign outside of every Palestinian city, and it says in 3 languages, Hebrew, Arabic, and English, this road leads to Area A. Under the Palestinian Authority, the entrance for Israeli citizens is forbidden. It's dangerous to your lives, and it's against Israeli law. Now, my hunch is that's because Israel doesn't want you to go in there and be taken hostage, and then they've got some leverage over you and to get some of the prisoners free and so on. It's just a pain when an Israeli stumbles into Palestine and gets taken hostage. So they don't even want you going there. I think if they went in there, it's up to them, in other words, you know. But Israel won't be liable for them. But the point is, Israelis can't go past that barrier. That would be Israeli soldiers. You go into there, it is Palestinian controlled from top to bottom. Here we have a place that has both license plates, yellow Israeli plates and green Palestinian plates. But at a glance, you know where that car's from. Here we have a traffic jam, and this is the way of life if you live in Palestine. You never know what kind of traffic jam there's going to be. We were going one direction, and there was a traffic jam that went on forever. And our guide told it, well, the guard is there, and he's making everybody stop and get out. And it's just, you know, he happens to be doing that today, and it just humiliates everybody, and it blows their schedule out of the water. We came back, and he was gone, and everybody was just passing through, and there was no wait at all. We got this little car for our crew of 6. It's the tightest quarters we've ever been in, but I was thankful for it, and it got us around quite nicely. You notice other little signs around that are just indicative of some serious problems and security risks. For instance, remember I said that Palestinians earn 1/10 as Israelis. Well, if you want a car mechanic, and you're an Israeli, you might get a good value by going into Palestine and hiring a Palestinian to fix your car. It's a great idea economically, but if you're interested in Israeli security, you don't want one of your people to leave their car in a Palestinian garage because he can drive a bomb back into your country and they can blow it up. So they've got this rule that it's prohibited to hand over a vehicle for repairs in Palestinian Authority. So there's these kind of concerns because of the heritage of violence. The countryside can be very beautiful. Before we leave town, we got ourselves a nice cup of coffee, the local Starbucks here. And then we went into the Judean desert. And the Judean desert is just breathtakingly beautiful. Early in the morning, the light was so nice, lots of shepherds out. And then we find these stranded old Christian monasteries from like the 5th century or the 6th century. This is the monastery of St. George, and it's amazing to think that for 1,500 years, Christian pilgrims have been coming here. Monks have been hanging out here. And we got to hike into this, and we got to visit it, and we got to film it. And it was quite an amazing experience and a reminder of how long and rich the history is of this region. Sadly, for our TV needs, the monks were camera shy. They said you can film the candles, and that's enough liveliness for your show. And but we did get to see a lot of pilgrims there and a lot of importance religiously to this beautiful spot. Orthodox Christians from Ethiopia, from all over the Middle East and North Africa, from former Soviet Union. Now, when you continue going down, you cross sea level, and you get to Jericho, one of the oldest inhabited cities on the face of the planet, and it is well below sea level. And, you know, to get a high wide, we'd have to talk ourselves onto the rooftop of a hotel. And This is Carl up there shooting a good shot of Jericho. For lunch, we would have feasts. And when I remember the feasts in Palestine, and I think back on the feasts in Israel, they're pretty much the same, you know. That's Palestinian, and that's Israeli. Palestinian, yummy. Israeli, yummy. The Dead Sea. 1,400 feet below sea level, the lowest place on earth. 1/3 of that water is actually minerals. That's why you're so buoyant. And it's very painful if you have any cuts or scrapes, because it gets right in there. It's like salty. And people bob like corks, and especially in the magic hour of the evening, it's just beautiful as tourists are there at resorts on the Dead Sea relaxing. All along the Dead Sea, there are little resorts. And you see Golan peace signs and all that sort of thing. And then you see lots of Israeli flags. And you're reminded that all of the Dead Sea, it may be in West Bank, but it's controlled by Israel. So they would have Israeli-controlled resorts. And if things are going nice and a Palestinian can pay the entry fee, they're welcome to go down to the beach. But the resorts would be controlled for tourism by Israel. As you travel around, you find a lot of nomadic, little ramshackle communities. A lot of them are right next to the roads nowadays because they're kind of tapping into the local water supply as best they can. But the Bedouin communities are under siege right now. And historically, they've always been, you know, raising their flocks and tending their flocks ever since ancient times. But now they're getting corralled in and tighter and tighter. And what's happening, we learned, is most Bedouins are now leaving their tents and moving into communities. And they're morphing into a sedentary life. And they are trying to keep as much of their traditional life as they can. So I was hoping to shoot a Bedouin community, but for the TV show, what we ended up shooting is a Bedouin family that had to become settled in a town, and how they were keeping their Bedouin traditions alive, but no longer being nomadic. It was a beautiful experience, and this Bedouin man, who is sort of the patriarch of his clan, showed us very proudly how he roasted his coffee. It was a beautiful experience. A town that's famous for its Bedouin heritage is Hebron. And Hebron is 1/3 of the Palestinian economy. It's a very vibrant economic scene, and Hebron is famous for its glassworks and its artisans that paint the glass. It's also famous for its Bedouin heritage, and Bedouins eat camels. So you can go to a butcher shop. This is Carl getting a close shot of a camel. And it's kind of a shock to see a camel's head in a butcher shop. The butcher shops there are literally butcher shops. They butcher a big animal, and it sits on the front porch until all the parts are sold. I've never really seen anything so purely butcher shop, you know? And I thought, well, that's really where butcher shops originated. Wandering through the streets of a city like Hebron, it's just, to me, entertaining. You can walk everywhere and have a gorgeous time. Just people watching, wonderful people watching, wonderful energy. I just thought there's not, in a lot of cases, there's not a lot of sights you'd travel to see, but just to be there and wander around through the markets, it's so colorful. You go into a restaurant, this would be the fast food section of the restaurant on the street. Upstairs there would actually be a restaurant, a sit-down restaurant, and it would have one wing for single men and one wing for families and women. And it's just an interesting sort of respect and privacy and that they would give families from young men. And as tourists, we were allowed to go in the family section. And it was just a very interesting social situation when you do have that sort of modesty in public, and much of the world is that way. Hebron is on the map because of this. This is the 1,000-year-old Crusader church sitting on an ancient holy site that holds the tomb of Abraham. 4,000 years ago, he was the guy who gave birth to Ishmael and Isaac, and from there we get the Israelite, and the Arab nations. This is the tomb of Abraham, and that makes Hebron a very important city. Now, because it's important to Muslims and Jews, I think more important to Muslims and Jews than Christians, you've got this Zionist interest in really planting the flag right there. And it's as Muslim of a city as you can imagine from an economic point of view. It is just over the top Arab. And you've got 300 or 400 Zionist settlers on the high ground right by Abraham's tomb, protected by a couple of thousand Israeli troops. So they can be right there close to the tomb of the patriarch. The patriarch that's a very big deal for Jewish people. And it just makes sense to be living near the tomb of the patriarch. But it's a very tough world, and these people have guns, and their women are it's very conservative. These would be conservative and Zionist Jews, and most of them, I understand, are from the United States. It's a fascinating sort of tension, and you walk in that area, and there's a distance between them and everybody else that really was painful for me to see as a tourist. I couldn't begin to talk to them. Then you've got this thriving Arab market under that. And when you go through the Arab market, you find a net above the market with garbage that was tossed down from the Israeli settlement above them. So you got this very poignant and painful mix of determined settlers surrounded by Israeli security forces with poor Muslim Arab merchants and markets and nets and garbage and the tomb of Abraham, who I don't even understand why he's so important, you know? So it's a fascinating place to check out when you can travel there. And you've got people raising their kids there. You've got very legitimate security concerns on both sides. You've got turnstiles. You've got teenagers that barely speak Hebrew right off the boat from Tunisia or Ukraine with big guns. The scariest thing happened to me in my whole trip was I walked through that turnstile to come by for the camera again, and the guard just pointed the gun right at me, and he just looked like he was a Boy Scout, you know, and he had this big gun. And I just said, I'll film somewhere else. And then you see this, I just enjoyed, or I found it fascinating to watch feisty old local people in the face of these teenage soldiers. And they were the soldier said, you can't go through, and she would say, this is my city, I can go through. And they'd have this very ugly face down that would last for half an hour, and then finally he'd say, okay, go through. But it was that sort of thing, and it was ugly. And you walk through a no man's land, and the different buildings are boarded up, and you got all sorts of flags, and you've got powerful art, political art that would be Zionist art, because there's the temple that was destroyed in 70 AD. And then I got to talk to guards, and they'd say, don't film here. And then we had to go through the checkpoints. And again, it was all about this. This is the tomb of Abraham. You've got Jewish people recognizing the importance of the place, worshiping as they do at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. You've got high security with Israeli troops and Muslim people wanting to go to their mosque right in the same spot. And you go inside and you find a holy spot that they used to mix it up, but a couple of decades ago, an Israeli extremist came into that mosque during Ramadan and killed 40 worshipers just with a high-powered gun. And it was a horrible massacre. Of course, there have been horrible massacres by Jews worshiping there before that. And it's just, they cannot share that spot. So today, you got the tomb of Abraham, and it's got bulletproof glass around it, and you've got Jews worshiping it from one side, and you've got Muslims worshiping it from the other side. And that's, to me, emblematic of the challenge we have here. How can we figure that out? This is looking at Abraham's tomb from the synagogue. And you go to the synagogue, and you see everybody worshiping and studying and praying, and it's a pretty beautiful scene. And you see soldiers there learning how to be good Hebrew Jewish Israelites. And we go to the other side, and we've got Muslims studying and praying and worshiping at the same spot, as they have for centuries and centuries. And above the mosque, you've got the omnipresent security camera keeping an eye on everything. And I just thought, I don't know how good I would be at living in this kind of a situation. It's a real tough situation. And outside, you've got angry political tourists who are there on political groups thinking this is terrible, and understandably so. So it's this poignant mix, and it's an opportunity for travelers to check that out if we want, and this is what we were sorting out in our travels. Farther north, we went to Nablus, and Nablus, I believe, means the new city way back in ancient times, and it is a fascinating city, thriving. It's famous for its soap and its beautiful dessert called kanafa. I don't normally go over the top on desserts, but kanafa, I would travel to Palestine just for kanafa. It is so good. And we got to film it being made, and then it's just beautiful. The market was fun, and the bookstores were just disorderly, but they worked. And the people were just fun to interact with and talk with and watch and photograph, and nibbles all over the place. Earlier, I was there on a Friday when I was scouting, and it was just desolate, because it's a Muslim town and Friday would be the Sabbath. So it's complicated when you're in the Holy Land. The Holy Land. I mean, 3 days a week are holy. Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, depending on where you're going. I mean, time and time again, it's a holy day. We got triple the Sabbath action over here, you know? So when you're traveling, you got to be mindful of that. But what struck me when I was in Nablus on Friday, walking through the same streets that were so boisterous on other days, was the graffiti and the posters lionizing martyrs or terrorists. And Nablus is famous as a hotbed for freedom fighters or terrorists who would go into Israel and be violent. And you've got these very powerful posters, and it just was really poignant and powerful to me to think of kids playing soccer on those streets, looking up to these kids as models, as patriots, as heroes. And that's a tough world to raise your kids in. It's a tough world when maybe you can make a case for it, maybe you can't. I mean, it's not the point. It's just a real sad situation when kids don't have enough hope to model their lives after anybody other than another kid that just was really violent. So you wish there was just an alternative to that, that's for sure. I mentioned the refugee situation, and that's a big part of the equation here. Refugees. There are hundreds of thousands of refugees in West Bank whose refugee status started in 1948 when Israel was established. Now, there were a lot of refugees in Israel, and Jewish people would say, we had refugees too, but we've worked and they've picked themselves up by their bootstraps, and they're not refugees anymore. They're contributing citizens, their lives are fine. And they would say, Muslims just are keeping their refugees so they have something to complain about. Why don't they just get their act together? Why don't rich Muslim countries give them some money and get them started? I don't know, but it doesn't negate the fact that there's 30,000 people living in this refugee camp. And they've still got the keys. The key is a big deal because they left their homes in what is today Israel thinking it'll just be a little while. They were told, we got to deal with these Israelis, these Jews, and you'll be able to go back in a while, but it's going to be a mess, so why don't you leave? The war will be over, you can go back. Well, Israel won the war. The people went with their keys, and they never went back. They never used those keys again. They keep those keys as a remembrance that they want to go back. They have land. Somewhere there's a door that this key will open, and it's mine. Well, that house is long gone, but they keep that key as a symbol. And you see that key all around. So you got that refugee situation, the reality of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees dislocated after the creation of Israel. And you've got that memory 60 years later with those keys and that desire to return. When you look at the graffiti, you can read a lot into it. You can see the key, you can see the Dome of the Rock, you can see the refugee camps, you can see the olive tree encompassing it all. It's a beautiful kind of symbolism there if you have that perspective. And it sort of indicates to me a powerful, deep-seated determination to find that kind of what they would think is justice. This is the gateway to the biggest refugee camp in Palestine, the Balata refugee camp at the edge of Nablus. And when you go in there from a rooftop, you see density. You see density like we can't imagine. And when you wander through, you got a main drag, and then you got the platting, which goes back to the original tents. There was enough place to pitch your refugee tent. 60 years later, the same platting survives, but you got cinder block houses now going up 8 floors. And that's a lot of density. I'll tell you, when you live in a part of the world that's not very densely populated, it's a real blessing. Here you got this density, and you got the United Nations overlooking it, as they do at all those refugee camps. You got community leaders that were happy to show us around. We had a beautiful welcome there in the refugee camp. You got all sorts of kids that are all excited that there's an American film crew there, and we had a lot of fun playing around with them and filming. And I was really intrigued by the traditional way of processing a chicken. On my scouting trip, I saw a kid. He went into a chicken shop, live chickens. He picked a chicken. The chicken was killed, drained, put into a centrifuge, and he pulls out, and it looks like a rubber chicken. No more feathers. And then washed up, put in a bag, and the kid goes home with dinner. I thought, good TV. So I came back, and not that my crew agreed, but I like that sort of thing. And we found a little kid. We auditioned the kids. And all the other kids wanted to play, and we had to deputize some of them to keep the other kids out who weren't actually actors for this. And then Carl, this is Carl right here, and Carl thinks like an editor as he's shooting, and he's running here and running there and getting all the necessary pieces so that when we get home, you can see the whole glorious processing of the chicken, in this case, capped with the happy kid going home to bring his mom a chicken, and he didn't even know he was going to go home with a chicken until he met this American film crew. I'll tell you, I'm so thankful for the work that my crew does, and Carl Bauer has shot the majority of our shows, and he is so committed to this just like me, and he's here now. Carl, can you stand up, please? Stand up, Carl. So Carl's working when the sun's out, when the light's right. Carl's out there working until we get this show done, and he's done it for, I think, 100 shows, so thanks, Carl. I remember going into this refugee camp and just being really struck by the reality of being a child in a refugee camp, being a child in a poor community with no hope. And I went into there's no more cyber cafes in most of the world because people have enough money to be online at home. But a poor community has cyber cafes because that's the only way anybody can get online. So I went into this cyber cafe, and it was this internet point, and the little kids were turning around and going, hello, what's your name? Hello, and then one little kid turned around, and I was so charmed by them all, and he looked at me and he goes, fuck you, rich man. And I thought, here's a kid who's got his political act together, okay? And it really struck me. I mean, I'm one of these round-trip revolutionaries, and I'm here empathizing with them, and his existence is there's not a lot of hope. I mean, and I just thought, God, if you're a parent, if you're a hardworking, smart kid, and you just live in structural poverty, you want to say that. You really have a right to say that, I think, when you live in that kind of a world. And you're surrounded by, I think, desperation. It's a very, very sad and difficult thing when you see those adorable kids, and then you see shrines around them who are people that had the courage to do something about something that was really humiliating. And I don't want to justify it, I don't want to excuse it, but we have to get beyond our difficult, he did that, we did that 500 years ago, 1,800 years ago, 50 years ago. Okay, it's terrible. Here's our situation now. Where can we go with this? It just seems like that's the important thing. As I travel, I just love looking at people, women more than men. And I'm also very curious about how Americans are so quick to condemn societies that make women cover their hair. I think it's very ethnocentric. I don't feel like I can judge other societies. Why do Hindus feed their cows better than their kids? I'm not going to put them down for that. There's probably a reason that I don't understand. Maybe they live in a world where there's no trees and cow pies are vital fuel and they got to work it into their whole religious ethic to take good care of their cows. I don't know. Why do women cover their hairs, in some societies? Well, maybe it's modesty. Maybe it's keeping women down, but boy, when I see women covering their hair in the Muslim world, to me it's very striking and very beautiful. I just learned a couple days ago, this woman's got a yogurt cup here, so her her scarf goes a little higher and she looks taller. Our women would have high heels because, it's not nice to walk around this way, but they want to look taller, right? And they've got a little more comfortable way to do it with their scarf. Well, that's cool. You look around and you look at these women and you wonder, what is their lot in life? Do they have to cover their hair? Do they choose to cover their hair? When you look at the world, in many Muslim countries, the women are hanging out together and the guys are over here. It kind of feels like, sort of the cruising scene that we had back in the 60s, and people are flirting and courting from a distance. What is the deal? Are these women trying to look modest, or are they covering their hair and they making it looking really good? I think it's quite a fashion statement in a lot of cases. And I would be very careful to condemn Muslims for making their women cover their hair, because if you go to an Orthodox Jewish community, you'll find women there have to cover their hair too. You find women there, once they're married, if they want to show their hair, the way I understand it, they have to wear wigs. They can show somebody else's hair, but they can't show their own. And here we have a shop that would be in the Jewish Orthodox community, and it's the same thing in conservative Christian communities. So it is a different culture, it's a different sort of situation, and to learn more about it, I wanted to go to the university. Birzeit University, the big university outside of Ramallah. Beautiful university. Had a chance to go there and see what the best and the brightest of Palestine was all about. And we talked to a bunch of kids, and we got to sit down with some girls at the college. And these three women let me interview them and ask them about the whole ethic of covering hair and what it was like for women in Palestine. And they say, we have a traditional society where women aspire to have the traditional roles of raising kids, and the men should bring home the bacon, that sort of thing. I guess not bacon, but... And I said, but what about women with professional degrees and higher education? And they said, there's more women than men in this university here. We have plenty of women that have very important roles in society. And when you look across Islam, you do see there's been plenty of women leaders and so on. So it's not a slam dunk that some societies are ahead of others with their treatment of women. It is just interesting. I asked them, these are three girlfriends, and one of them chose to wear the hijab and the other didn't, and hijab, I think it's called hijab. And I asked her, do you laugh at the same jokes as your friends? Do you go to the same parties and all this kind of stuff? Absolutely. Everything's the same socially that way. Why do you wear this scarf on your hair? Do your parents make you? No. She says, I just feel more respected on the streets when I wear this. And I don't know, some American women might not feel respected on the streets, but when you're a woman on the streets in a Muslim city and you're wearing a scarf, you are more respected by the men. And if you're not wearing a scarf, you're more leered at by the men. That was what I got out of that. I asked her, do you like have a bunch of scarves, and do you choose what to wear? Is that part of your daily thing? She says, her girlfriends all giggled, and she says, yes, I've got 120 scarves. And every morning depends on my mood. And she said, one of the fashion rules is never wear a solid with a solid. It's always a pattern and a solid, or a pattern and a solid, okay? So I just thought there's more to wearing a scarf than just the quick American condemnation of conservative religious people who cover their hair. And when you travel around Islam, I think that's an interesting thing to be mindful of and to explore. Ramallah is the de facto capital of Palestine. I say de facto because they really want Jerusalem to be the capital. But Jerusalem is not the capital, and Ramallah is where the government is being put up. Ramallah is the one big, modern, and energetic city, I would say. It's the city where you'll find a lot of American Palestinians who have gone home as their countries got independence. There's a lot of American accents in Ramallah, more than elsewhere, because there's a lot of Palestinian Americans. It's got a nightlife. It's got a famous nightlife. I made friends with one guy on my scouting trip, and he just took us out, or took me out, just a night on the town. And it was fun to get that little slice of Palestinian big city culture. And of course, Ramallah is the home of Arafat's tomb. Yasser Arafat. Now, when you think about Yasser Arafat, he's famous in our society as a terrorist, and he was a terrorist, but he's also considered the father or the founding statesman of modern Palestine. He made a lot of mistakes. Most Palestinians are upset with certain calls he made. A lot of people would say he had opportunities to get a viable two-state, but they didn't accept it. Palestinians would tell you there were reasons, good reasons, they didn't accept what they were offered, but maybe some people would think they wish they had those chances now. Whatever the case is, Arafat is respected as the man who put Palestine on the map. A generation later, people still recognize him as the modern founder of their state. It's quite interesting. When we think about the struggle of Palestine, by the way, we just went to Hebron and then Jericho, Nablus, and finished in Ramallah. From there, it's just an hour drive to the airport. When you're traveling around Palestine, it's easy to fly into Tel Aviv, and within an hour you can be in Bethlehem. 15 hours direct flight from Los Angeles to Tel Aviv. I flew in on this flight on Royal Jordanian from Egypt. I was in Cairo this spring, went to Amman, and then into Jerusalem. You bring your American passport, you don't need a visa, but you get an Israeli stamp on a piece of paper, and they put it in your passport so that you can travel into Muslim countries no problem, which is handy. You've got Israeli shekels that are used in Palestine. They do not have their own coins. They don't change money. If you go to an ATM in Palestine, you got your choice of different currencies that you can get back. You would get shekels, the Israeli currency, because that works all over Palestine and Israel. Your cell phone works in Palestine with an Israeli SIM card. It's pretty much, it feels from an infrastructure point of view, kind of like you're in Israel. The hotels in Israel are just like the hotels you'd find in Europe, plenty of modern, comfortable hotels. The hotels in Palestine are more, there's a few business hotels in business cities. Otherwise, there's a lot of religious hotels that are associated with churches, and they're quite comfortable and friendly and very easy to book through the internet. Quite inexpensive to sleep in hotels in Palestine. This is the breakfast we got in our hotel in Ramallah. As far as driving around, it's very easy to drive around. The roads are good, population, the traffic was pretty sparse, and as long as there's not tension over there, you can travel around in Palestine without stopping at the roadblocks. But when there's tension, everything is going to change. As far as language barrier goes, things are in 3 scripts. Hebrew for the Jewish Israelis, Arabic for Arab Israelis and Palestinians, and English for everybody else. Having been there for a couple of weeks and considering all of this, it really is inspirational to see the love that people have for their country and how far they've come and what they've dedicated to their country and their culture and their religion. And you gotta like that. It's also exciting to see a young nation against great odds and in a not a very smooth way because of the complexity of the history and the whole situation, finally getting recognized by the United Nations. And I think getting recognized by the United Nations in part because they are no longer resorting to violence. It's been, since 2008, since there's been a terrorist attack. Maybe it's baby steps, but I think that's very, very promising. If you think about the peaceful solution, and this shot shows an ancient olive tree and a modern wall. And that's very poignant to me when you think of the symbolism of the olive tree for Palestinians who maybe they don't have all of the industrial energy and the hard economy might and all that sort of thing, but they're just as legitimate there as anybody else. Maybe they're sparsely populated, but they've been there since ancient times. When you think about how we can sort through this problem, it's clear to me Israel is holding the cards. Israel really can call the shots for the time being. And the way I see it, there's 3 options that it could go. You could have 2 viable states. Israel as a Jewish state, Palestine as a Muslim state. You could have 1 state with a modern pluralism, secular pluralistic state, meaning everybody gets to worship what they like and Palestine and Israel working together. Or you could have 1 state that is Jewish with Palestinians in the equivalent that we would call Indian reservations, okay? Now really, those are the 3 options. If you don't have a modern secular pluralistic state and you have 1 state, you've got a Jewish-dominated state with a Muslim underclass. We're going to be angry, and you're going to have to keep them occupied like they are today. I don't think Israel wants that. I think if you had the modern pluralistic state, in the future, there would not be a Jewish state, and I would love to see a Jewish state. I think there should be a Jewish state for Jewish people. But that's not going to happen in an elegant way without having two states. And that means Israel, who holds the cards, needs to find a way that's okay for their national security to give Palestine dignity, security, and their younger generation hope. It's an exciting opportunity to me. But the scary thing to me is Israel is playing it aggressive right now, where they are reaching into Palestine, building infrastructure, building settlements, taking Israel, occupying Israel. You see Israeli flags festooned on houses in the middle of the Arab quarter of Jerusalem, so that there can never be a two-state system. They got the power to do that right now. But my fear is if Israel exercises the power it has, because it's got the upper hand, to dominate the Palestinians and then occupy them and keep them down so they can have this Jewish state, Israel is going to find itself in a position where it has to become what it doesn't want to be in order to be at all. It's going to have to be ruling an apartheid state. So that is the three options that I see they have. And I didn't talk to anybody over there who thought there was a clear right answer or a clear best answer. Everybody has a different idea about where it could go. Clear to me, the Palestinians, 4 million people, are living in a situation that if you were there, you'd think you were under a military occupation. That's what it feels like. And that's the future if the status quo is to go on. And I don't think that's a promising future. Sadly, a lot of people don't feel a lot of hope. They feel like Israel has cut off the chance for two viable states, and now we're stuck with this one-state situation. And when you talk to the people there, whether they're Christians or Muslims or Jews, there's not a lot of hope that you would think there might be. On the other hand, there's more chance for people to connect, and I think if we can build on that, that can kindle some kind of hope. That's kind of what I took out of my 2 weeks in Palestine, and I heard a lot of people saying shalom, or salam, or peace. And when I go back, I hope that they can really move on that, because all the religions have the same basic tenet: love your neighbor, you know. And they've learned that they're going to have to share this together. I don't think there's any way that there's going to be no more Jews there or no more Muslims there. I hope that's interesting for you. Thank you very much for coming. Happy travels. Thank you. Thank you very much.